I've got with me tonight a very important guest, a friend of mine who I can tell you right now, I can say this about very few people who are in public office, but the man sitting next to me is a godly Christian man. The Word of God is clearly in his heart because it comes out of his mouth so often. He is the senator of the 23rd Senate District in California. Please say hello to Senator Mike Morrell. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah, well, glad to have you. We have a whole lot of things to discuss tonight.
Yeah.
Things are
hopefully
moving.
I'm ready.
Well, things are moving at such a fast pace, it's hard to keep up with all of this. But of course, we have the bills. We have some Senate bills coming up, Assembly bills. I know you're on the Senate side, but I want to throw out some of these Assembly bills as well so we can talk about it. We've got, of course, the COVID stuff that's going on, and that's kind of occupying everybody's thought process, but there's a lot with that as far as public schools, churches, stuff like that. So we want to talk about some of those issues. Of course, the public school, we want to make sure that you guys know things that are going on in the public school and how you as a parent or a grandparent can be more involved in what your kids are learning. And so we're going to talk about some of that tonight. Just so many different things. We got the elections coming up where we're going to talk about that, and maybe COVID has something to do with how the elections might go. And I even want to talk to you about your plans for the future.
Thank you.
So we'll see how that goes. So why don't we just go ahead and get into the bills first?
Yeah. Let me just caveat, a warning to the audience is I don't have all the answers, but you're going to find I have strong opinions. So anything you don't like said, don't blame it on Pastor Tim. So,
all right. I've hung out with you enough to know that we definitely think very similar on a lot of these issues, especially having a strong appreciation for the Constitution and how this nation was founded, and then also, of course, letting this guide a lot of what we think. And this is very important to you, I know, and it's very clear it's important to you because it comes out of your mouth so often, and so that's a good sign. All right, so let's talk about some of the bills. So these bills that I'm going to bring up right now, they're absolutely wicked in my mind. They're in my opinion, they're unconstitutional, but we're going to see what Senator Morrell has to say about these things. But I'm going to briefly just run through them and then just kind of give the floor to you, and you can tell me what you think about these things. So we've got AB 2826. This would outlaw, this is what this will do. It'll outlaw in box stores, let's say Walmart, Target, stuff like that. It's going to outlaw the ability for a store like that to have a boys section and a girls section for toys and clothes and stuff like that. So let's say you've got a newborn boy, you want to go get your boy a onesie, you go to the boys section and you're like, wait a minute, where's the boys section? And they're going to tell you you're not allowed to have a boys section. It's just everything, there's all genders here and everything's included in that. We've got Assembly Bill 2218. This is a LGBT transgender wellness fund. So essentially what this does is it provides millions of dollars to give sex change operations, cross-sex hormones, and basically this would be giving this to places like nonprofits, hospitals, healthcare clinics, other types of medical providers that would provide these things for adults. And minors. So children would be getting these types of services. Let's see. AB 2035 requires social workers to inform foster youth, this is 10 years and up, to secret abortions and birth control. So 10 years old, you're in foster care, hey, we're going to make sure that you can have access to an abortion in secret is kind of the key there. So let's just go ahead and stop with that for now. So, Senator Mel, what's your thought on some of these and where are we going with this?
So a couple of things. Why politics are so important. Politics is just simply electing people to tell us how to live. Only 40 state senators in California make laws. These 40 are making laws like this today that affect 40 million. There's a saying that you may not take an interest in politics, but politics takes an interest in you. It affects every area of our lives. economic, political, and here moral. And we've been told the two things we shouldn't talk about is religion and politics, but yet it's the only two ways that men throughout the ages have either been oppressed or set free. So it's two of the most important subjects to talk about. So as you study the scriptures or you look at history, the breakdown of a society is in morality, first of all. Second of all, what makes a nation great and prosperous? Washington said in his farewell address, the centerpiece of the speech was of all the habits and dispositions which bring political prosperity, morality, and religion are indispensable supports. Number two, Moses, over 52 times in the book of Deuteronomy, 34 chapters, reminds the children of Israel after 430 years of captivity, you're going to be given prosperity, right? But he tells them that over 50 times. But then he says right after that, but it's all predicated on you following those moral laws, decrees, and commands. So the Bible says it, Churchill said it, Abraham Lincoln said it. So I'm a believer that morality and religion are indispensable supports. And then the second thing is I lay the base here for all these bills, and I think I can wrap them up kind of quick. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, right? But against the principalities of darkness. And there's a popular book out right now called Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, How to Destroy America Through Disruption, Lies, and Immorality. And now his hero is Satan. He writes that in the book. And any kook could write a book like that. But what's interesting, some of his fans are Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, right? And I see a lot of people in Sacramento, some of my friends across the aisle, who seem to have embraced many of these political ideologies, as well as Marxism and Leninism over Washington and Lincoln. So here's the challenge on that. They're not playing on the same team or the same set of values as us. Because some people do ask me, hey, do they not have common sense? No. They've been indoctrinated through whatever, schools or colleges, and they're on a whole different playing field, you see. And they call themselves progressives, which is just a nice word for socialism, which is expanding government, and government controls everything. So that's laying sort of the foundation, because you ask yourself, how can they continue to come up with bills like this? Well, again, if you get back to history, you know, this battle that we're in, this spiritual battle in the heavenlies, if you look at Alinsky's book about how to break down the country, you break it down with morality. All these bills you name are about immorality, but what's fascinating to me is they're all directed towards our minors, all towards our children. You see, they're starting them at a young age, so by the time, you know, and all it is, it's going to be self-destruction, because all of history has proven that those nations that will prosper and have peace and security are only those nations whose God is the Lord. And so again, these bills here remind me, the first one you talked about, a couple of them, again, it's directed towards minors, which is wrong. And what's interesting, so many of them are without parental consent. How in the heck can you give these people, these kids, drugs and even, you know, promote these types of things without parental guidance? So one thing is, I think we've got to make sure our parents are not so trusting of the schools today or the public education. You know, God, a lot of young people are falling away from the faith today. But God, and because we're in a dangerous world, but God has given kids two things to make sure they get through all these hurdles in life, and that's parents. So the parents have to take the responsibility, right? If you send your kid to a public school or whatever, it's up to the parents to make sure that that school's not attempting to tear down what you're attempting to weave in the life and mind of your child's soul. And so again, parents have to be more active and vigilant and exercising their civic responsibility for their children and making sure they're involved with their school's education. But can I say one more thing?
Of course.
I think of the book by C.S. Lewis, The Screwtape Letters. And if you remember, The Screwtape Letters is a fictional account of the demon Screwtape speaking to Wormwood. And they're writing letters back and forth. And so Wormwood, the nephew, has this one young man that he's trying to destroy. So Screwtape writes to him and says about this young man, he says, ever since he's been a youth, he's had a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about in his mind. What Screwtape's trying to say, whoever controls the mind controls the soul, and whoever controls the soul controls that young person's eternal destiny. And then later on in the book, Screwtape says to Wormwood, my dear Wormwood, next time you come down to our Father's house below, come and amuse yourself as you see cages filled with these types. So I think the thing is, the warning there on education in general, we want to be careful not to send our kids to schools with a dozen incompatible philosophies, none of which are not compatible with the truth. Right. We have to guard their minds and their souls until they're at that proper age you can let them go. And when I had our kids were growing up, I had people say, well, you know, they've got to stand on their own sometime. Well, you don't send your third grader out to stand up to a 6-foot teacher and 30 people and kids in their peer group, just like most of us find it hard to stand up to our employer and 30 of our peers. And so you can't expect your little third or fourth grader. So parents have to really guard their souls, because what education is, at one time it was defined as the molding together of the intellect and the soul.
Right.
So sorry to take a long time on that one, but that's an important question, and the fact that they're attacking our youth shows you the powers that's behind this.
Right, and you're absolutely right. You brought up several things about history. You brought up Churchill. You brought up the Bible and what happened with the Israelites being able to be prosperous, but they had to live rightly. And one of the things that we see as you get into the scriptures is you look in the book of Judges. You look in the historical account of the people of Israel, and what you see is there was this continual revolution. You see this circular, they went through the same thing over and over again, where they would be doing good, things would be going well, and okay, well, things are going well. But then they started to allow sin to creep in, and then it says they all did what was right in their own eyes. And as they did what was right in their own eyes, things started going bad, because when you're not honoring God, things start going bad. And then they start crying out to God, oh God, help us, things are going bad, help us. And God would step in and he would help them, and they would repent, and things would start going good again, and then they start doing what's right in their own eyes. And this was this thing that went over and over and over again. And Edmund Burke said, if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. And right now, what's going on in our culture, I mean, maybe you're tuning in right now, you're not into the Bible. My hope is that you'd become into the Bible, that you'd really start to dig into it. But maybe you're just a student of history. You can look at examples all over the place where we see the fact that when people do whatever's right in their own eyes, it doesn't work out well for those people, because there has to be a standard. And I can tell you this, as you study history and you look back, all the major empires that would rise and then fall, and then rise and then fall, there was an end to these different empires. And there was something very similar at the end of each of these. And one of the things that was similar was the sexual perversion of adults being forced on the children. And when you see the sexual immorality of adults being forced on the children, we see it happening right now in our own nation with abortions, and now secret abortions, cutting the parents out. You know, these people that want the kids to be sexualized at such an early age. When you start seeing that type of stuff, you got to know that there's not going to be very long where that type of environment's going to last, because God just doesn't put up with that. There's an end to God's patience. He's very long-suffering, but there's an end to God's patience, and truly it is when adult sexual perversion is forced now on the children. We're seeing that widespread throughout the world. Yeah,
and the thing that I worry about is I've got things invested in the future. I've got kids and now 7 grandkids, right? And so it's a duty. Proverbs tells us it's our responsibility to leave an inheritance to our children. And I believe that goes well beyond just the financial, but a freedom to worship God. And one example you gave, the children of Israel, they were in that desert for 430 years. I don't want our desert to last that long till God, because it's brutal living under a dictatorship. But we have been told that luxury and prosperity can often turn our heads away from God because, again, that's mentioned in the scriptures, But I think it was a pastor from 1795. I don't have this completely memorized, but I believe his name was Samuel West, said that when man goes contrary to the laws of nature, meaning God places into human nature certain laws we're to live by, and that everybody knows that. And that's according to Romans chapter 2, that God's written the moral law on here and here. So when he says when man goes contrary to the laws of nature, and he's talking in the sexual context, he says they introduce confusion and disrupt a society. Henceforth, where licentiousness begins, liberty ends. So what he was doing in 1795 is just prepping the people for the future. If you do become prosperous, don't forget God, because the next thing will lead to sexual immorality, and then you're done. And we can see that too, in just the fact that the divorce rate has skyrocketed. And the first thing that God ordained before He ordained government was the family. Kids, boy, they suffer. I came from a family that had some divorce in it, and my sister did not fare well. She was a statistic, you might say, a sad statistic. But so anyway, those are some of the things. But I feel like, just slap me upside the head if I'm hogging the conversation. I'm a ball hog when I used to play basketball anyhow. But Dantes Inferno, there's 7 layers of hell, right? And I just feel like in California, and we have to stop this, that we keep circling the drain. And I wonder how far down we are. Are we in the first layer, the second layer, the third layer? Yeah. But I can guarantee you we're getting towards the bottom when we start sexualizing our kids as young as first grade.
Yes.
And that should be something that all of us fear. Even a person that's not a Christian, just for your prosperity and your well-being and peace and safety in a nation, they should care.
Right. Oh, yeah. I'm with you 100%. And, I talk to people a lot about these topics. And many of the people I talk to are not Christians, but they're just people with some simple common sense. Boys are boys, girls are girls. It's been going on for 6,000 years. There's, this shouldn't even be up for debate, but this is what's going on. So let me ask you this, Senator Morrell. These bills, these are things that are coming down the pipeline. They're not actually approved and into law yet, but
they're going to work to get them there.
They're going to work to get them there. They've been working to get this type of legislation sent through very successfully for several years. So what would you say to the parent, to the grandparent, to the guardian that's watching right now? They have a responsibility to ensure the safety and the well-being, and like you said, leave an inheritance to your children's children, which means more than money. It means the freedoms and everything that you and I have experienced growing up here in America, the America that we knew and we loved. We see it circling that drain. What do the parents and grandparents do?
Well, at any time in our history, we cannot take our eyes off the ball, right? We're busy with work, we're busy with this, but we have to keep focused on the number one thing is our kids. Because I will say this, we've had a number of friends, pastors. Church I used to go to, our pastor and his wife sat right on our front couch just lamenting how their kids had fallen away. And I mean, they were in tears about it, and things like that had happened more than once. And so, you got to pay attention to those things. And one thing, my daughter asked me recently, because she has 4 children now. She said, "Dad, if you had 10 kids, not that we did, but if you had 10 kids, and 9 of them were walking with the Lord, but 1 had fallen away, where would your emotions be? With the 9, would you be praising God that the 9 are walking with God, or the 1 who's fallen away?" And I said, always, so you've got to pay attention to your kids, Kristen. And so we have to do that. And so we have to be active and vigilant and put them number one, like most parents do, but quite often, sometimes we do take the eye off the ball. And I'm concerned too that we have to be careful in these schools that teach a dozen incompatible philosophies, because kids believe teachers over parents. And that happened to me when my son was in the 5th grade. He said something. I said, "David, that's wrong." And he goes, "Oh, no, Dad. Mr. Smith, that's not his real name. Mr. Smith's the teacher, and you're not." And I realized how much authority teachers have in their lives. So number one, we have to watch. Number two, we have to be involved in the political process. But here's the caveat and the warning to the public. If you have a politician come and speak to your group, and you're a business group, they know they're going to speak in businessese. If they come to a church, they're going to speak in churchese. They know how to work the system, right? And so many people vote based on the personality and the speeches that they hear. But the reality of it is we have to see and watch their voting record. I was up on stage in the city of Riverside, in fact, with two people from the other side of the aisle, and it was a group of business owners. And they said, we're a lot like Senator Morrell. We really love small businesses. And I was kind of caught off guard, and I said, well, I just want to kind of make a distinction here that there is a chasm that separates us. I said, my voting record with the National Federation of Independent Businesses was a 97%, and my friend here was a 14%, and my friend here was a 19%. So I just want to make sure that you as the audience know, because they were business owners. These guys were not being truthful. And the lady who put it on was related to one of the senator, and she hasn't invited me back since to speak. But I just couldn't let that comment go, because that's what these politicians tell people. I'm just like you. And then people walk away. But when you look at their voting record, it'll tell a different story. So how do you know a politician is lying?
Typically when their mouth is moving.
Yeah, hopefully that's not the case with me. But anyway, but that's what parents have to do. And then the last thing, and grandparents, you can really play a part as your kids are busy at work trying to make a living in the lives of your grandchildren. And prayer, look, I'm not a prayer warrior, but prayer, my wife is, and it's a good thing. It'll pay high dividends, and that's something else you can do. But you got to be actively engaged and watching every step, because you got to mold together the intellect and soul, and you got to get them through those years through high school.
Yeah, it's incredible, the spiritual warfare. I've heard you mention this several times now. Spiritual warfare. We definitely wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the evil rulers of the darkness that's here in this world. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead.
I appreciate talking with you.
Go ahead.
We do think about it. So our son worked across the street from the White House a couple of years ago. And so I call him and just say, hey, you've got, ramp up your spiritual armor of God, because I just feel like, the principalities of darkness is, they're ramping up their forces, right? And so I just kind of wanted to put the bug in his ear, right? And he said, Dad, I get it. He says, I walk past the front of the White House on the way to work every day, and every day out there, this is a couple of years back, he said there's witches casting spells upon the White House. And so, that is bizarre, right? And but he saw that every day. So he's in tune to that, and we should also realize, there are powers of darkness, because you can see them. They're coming out of the closet, right? They're no longer hiding. And so that's why the Christians have to step up and protect the minds and souls of our young kids. And again, we've got to be active in, politics and reading the Word, and teaching our kids all those things which are needed to revive our land and restore America. I wish my kids could grow up like I grew up, where you could roam the streets of the whole town on your bike when you were 7 years old, and your parents didn't have to worry about you.
Right. Definitely not the case nowadays, especially as we start releasing more and more criminals back out onto the street. You knew I was going to say that, huh?
Well, that's, But they arrest a paddleboarder in Malibu when no one's around, but they let out murderers today.
Right.
And that's not my side of the aisle, by the way, folks. That's the progressive socialist side of the aisle.
Right. And that whole side of the aisle, they play games. We see it in our public school systems. They play games with you. They'll invite you to speak, but conveniently forget to invite you to speak.
It's happened to me twice.
Tell the audience about that.
Well, a few years back, I went to a convention, regional convention with the school board, and they invited 8 Democrats and me. And so I went with fear and trembling, because I had a reputation that I went to schools to get better. I want to help the children. I want to help the teachers, but the kids are my priority, right? And so anyway, I went with fear and trembling, but I had a few of I got there and heard 3 of my across the aisle friends speak. And I brought 2 speeches, the one just to be polite and kiss up to them, and then the one what I really wanted to say. Well, I realized that they were patronizing the 3 ahead of me. So I just said, I'm just gonna say, give the other speech. And actually went pretty well, because what I discovered is a lot of those teachers in the room, matter of fact, I brought up the C.S. Lewis thing that I brought up to you, and I said, and what's, families sort of splitting apart, you guys are being called more now than you ever had. And if you're in this job just for money, you shouldn't be here, because teaching is a calling. And so it was pretty good, because these teachers were tracking with me. A lot of them were nodding their heads, had read C.S. Lewis, so I assumed they were Christians. And so the thing that, it ended up going really well. I was the only guy who got interrupted about 3 times with applause. And the thing that I figured out that day is the teachers like me. It was the unions that I don't think. So anyway, I got invited. So then the last 2 years, I've got invited, and I've been on their program. They just neglect to tell me. And so this last year, I had a young lady who's a Christian lady from Redlands, on the school board of Redlands, and she said, "Where are you? You're supposed to be speaking next." And I go, "Where am I? Where and why?" She goes, "You're on the program." And that was the second year and it happened. And then what they say, well, we invited Mike Morrell. He's in this particular party, and then he blows us off. But very deceptive. But I just want to say, on a positive note, I love those teachers. You know what I mean? But their union has played hardball with me.
Yeah. Many of the watchers right now, the people that tune into our watch, many of them are aware of what goes on with the unions. The California Teachers Union, in my opinion, is the most corrupt union in the state of California. Personally, I believe that. But the unions really are behind a lot of what's going on. Teachers are paying their dues to the unions. The unions are taking that money, helping to write legislation that ends up cutting the parents out. Same thing with the Parent Teachers Association. They're parents, many of you are tuning in right now. You're at your school, you're working so hard to raise money for the PTA, and then when Senator Morrell comes up with a great bill, SB 673, and we have parents in droves come into the Capitol to say, hey, we want parental rights, we see there's some opposition, and one after another was, we're with the PTA. We're with the PTA. We represent the PTA. It was
ACLU?
The ACLU,
Planned
Parenthood. I mean, it's what we say, all the usual suspects. So it really is a spiritual battle. These principalities and powers have worked their way into these types of organizations. They want to cut parents out, and parents need to be armed with this type of information. So,
and by the way, do you remember what the senator leading the committee said? She got frustrated, and she said, "Yeah, you parents probably wouldn't." I forgot exactly what she said, but it was something like, "You're probably too busy to help the kids anyhow. That's why we have to do it."
Right.
And remember, the parents booed her. And that's when she got a little bit upset
told
with
you
me.
that you need to get your people under control.
Yeah. Anyway,
but your
that
response
was a good day.
Brilliant, though.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Because she was lecturing us.
She was.
Yeah. And I mean, and it just kind of goes, it's part and parcel to what goes on there. We see right now Gavin Newsom, what he said about parents and children, and he said that the children in the state of California are suffering right now because they're being taught by their parents. They're suffering because they're not in school, and it's just, there's great teachers in school, but let's face it, right now the leftist mindset that's being propagated in the public school system is a very dangerous thing for these young minds, and it's something that we as parents need to be aware of, and we need to fight against. We need to stand firm for our biblical worldview. Let me shift gears because we don't have too much time left, but COVID-19. This is going on. Everybody wants to hear about it. There's definitely, in my opinion, a very spiritual battle that's being fought right now with this. I would never say that God gave COVID-19 to us, but what I would say is that in the midst of this, I'm seeing God at work. I'm seeing God moving all around us. I see him stirring up the church. Many of you that are tuning in right now, you're stirred up, you're fired up, many of you. You want to do something, you want to get involved in, and there's a lot that you can get involved in. But before I talk about some of those things you can get involved in, I want to ask you, Senator Morrell, just your personal opinion. I have a few different things I want to ask you. Number one is, do you believe that this pandemic, that behind it is some sort of globalist mindset? Are there any of your colleagues in the Senate that are talking about potentially this globalist mindset or this globalist agenda? And is there some sort of general consensus among conservative senators?
Yeah, I think there's a consensus, but at different levels. I might have a little bit more intensity. But on this, they talk about the models, first of all. I want you to know what I've learned, because I'm just learning about this stuff. So there's the models, how they predict on how many people are going to die. But really, you need data. So we want to rely on data, not models. But remember what science says, because they want to throw science back up in our face. And this should alarm us, because if you remember, science in the very beginning, they said 2.2 million people would probably die from this virus in the United States. And then they dropped their figures to 1 million, and then I think it was 600,000, and then they dropped it to 200,000, and then 100,000 people, and then it was 81,000. Now it's around 60 or 70,000. So, I mean, they started at 2.2 million, science did, and they dropped it. So just as a consumer, as a person who let's just say, I don't have a dog in the fight, as you say, that I'm neutral. That's what I'm trying to say. Looking at their models and their science, I'm lacking confidence when I see that stuff happening. The second thing is, when you look at what's really happened, the statistics, Wall Street Journal published this, almost 25% of these deaths are caused or are from, unfortunately, seniors in senior facilities, And then another huge percentage of people that pass away, unfortunately, of this disease are seniors with an underlying health condition, obesity, high blood pressure, and those types of things. And so science has been way off on these things. And then the thing that I'm trying to reason through, just as common sense that God's given us, doesn't mean I'm right, but usually these diseases don't pass over. They hit everyone. And it's just interesting, this one seems to be hitting our seniors or people with conditions. It's going right over our kids, and few kids are being harmed by this. So every day that goes by, I'm becoming suspicious of science. But there's these two doctors from Kern County, Bakersfield, did an excellent, they surveyed, I think, 6,500 of their patients. And they explained that fresh air is good, sunshine's good, and a lot of other things that we should be out there. Careful. You don't want to be in a football arena with 80,000 spectators, right? That's not what they mean. Social distancing is fine. And they had an excellent video that went viral with, I think, 5 or 6 million views. And Facebook took it down the other day, and YouTube did too. So it's kind of interesting because there does seem to be something that I'm concerned about that's going beyond this. Because on one hand, you can still go get marijuana, and at the other hand, like in Michigan, you cannot go buy plants and seeds for your garden, Mm-hmm. And so it's just a lot of things are not clear to me, and so it does lead me to believe that there could be something that we should be suspicious of. And again, I'm always suspicious of an overreaching government, mm-hmm. You see, and so I'm taking it a day at a time, and I am being cautious myself. But I am getting to a point where I do think we should considering reopening back up our businesses who are hurting, as well as our churches. All of those, for our governor or whoever got this term going, that some businesses and churches are non-essential versus other businesses are essential. All churches, all businesses are essential. It's just, I think during these times we should be cautious, but there's ways that we as Americans can figure out how to do that and keep people safe.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there any sort of talk amongst the conservative senators saying, hey, we can do this? Is there something that you guys are trying to work towards together?
We're hoping, the governor doesn't seem like, it seems like he has his what he wants to do, and he's going to stick to it. We've had meetings with him, and we haven't persuaded him. So he's on a path. We think it'd be wise to open up regionally, like Mendocino County, I think, had one COVID case. And then Kern County, they've had a few. One of my hospitals, because I called all the CEOs of the hospitals in my district, and they were very concerned. And by the way, they got their hospital up and running, and they prepared very well for this. But they have about 220 beds, and they also put up a tent in the parking lot with another 60 beds because they're waiting for this increase. My understanding, and I haven't checked now for a week or so, but the most COVID patients they ever got to was 19, you see, and they still have all those other beds. And in the meantime, our governor has said we can't do elective surgery. So I know of other hospitals, because I've spoken with CEOs, that's where they make their money, and they've had to furlough doctors and nurses that work on elective surgeries. And so, again, that's another thing that's not common sense to me. If you've got 100 beds open, you should open that up to people who are sick, who need elective surgery, and we need to be getting people in the hospital who, have signs right now that maybe there is something seriously wrong with them.
Right.
And so the whole thing, wherever there's confusion, that makes me nervous, right? This is not an orderly process, the way it's been ran. It's been miscommunicated, and what they said was going to happen didn't happen, and the things they said would happen, or the things wouldn't happen, has happened. And again, communication's the key to any relationship, marriage, and especially politics. Your greatest speakers were Washington and Churchill and Ronald Reagan, and they always communicated in such a way that when they were done, you knew where they stood. And that's not the case with what's going on with this COVID. So it does alarm me, and we are talking amongst ourselves, and we are concerned that there's something up, and we're trying to navigate the system. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm coming here tonight to go into the public. I trust the public more than I do the politicians. So I'm not trying to persuade Gavin Newsom at all, because I think he's going to do what he's going to do. And so I've worked with the business community. As you know, we were on a call today with 550 pastors, working with them. And so again, Ronald Reagan always would trust the people more than the politicians. And if that's good enough for Ronald Reagan, it's good enough for Mike Morrell.
Yeah. Well, the thing that you're saying, it's exactly how things are supposed to work. You're supposed to trust the people. We live in a time, it's weird, because I have a lot of people coming to me saying, hey, Pastor Tim, you're doing this, you're doing that, and this is civil disobedience. You're supposed to submit to the government. Didn't you know that? Romans chapter 13, you're supposed to submit to the government. Didn't you know Jesus said that you're supposed to render to Caesar what's Caesar's? And I talk to people that bring these things to me, and I try to remind them, like, first of all, you have to bridge the gaps with Scripture. A lot of time has gone by since this was written, so you bridge a time gap. Geographically, we live in a different area than this was written. Governmentally, render to Caesar. Well, I don't live in a government where Caesar is the one who rules. Caesar being the emperor, Caesar being like the king. I live in a democratic republic. And in the Democratic Republic, who is the king?
Citizen.
I am. We the people, if you're watching this right now, you're a citizen of this great nation. We the people, we're the king. And we get to tell people like Senator Morrell what to do. Yeah. And you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to represent what your constituents want. And you've done a great job of that. And I'm grateful that there's men like you that are doing that job. I'm excited to see if Assemblywoman Melendez can get that Senate seat and be one of your colleagues, because I think she's done a great job, because right now she's in my district, or I'm in her district, whichever way you want to look at it. I'm in her district. But she's done a great job, and you've done a great job, and this is how it works, is if you reach out and go, okay, let me see what the people are saying.
Well, let me add to some things about civil disobedience, right?
Yeah.
Moses stood toe-to-toe to the king of Egypt, right? That was civil disobedience. He didn't just lay down and said, okay, I give up. He stood toe-to-toe with that man, right? The king of kings at that time of history. Was it Rahab, who was a prostitute? was a spy against her own government. And she's in Hebrews chapter 11 as a hero of the faith. You know, God told, or Nehemiah told everybody as we're building this thing, you know, we want to protect over our families, so be prepared if anybody tries to take any of our stuff. Paul appealed to Caesar. He wanted, that was the Supreme Court. He knew he was a Roman citizen, and so he just didn't lay down and take it. He used the court system to keep appealing his case up the line all the way to the Supreme Court of Rome. And so I don't know where this comes in that we have to lay down and take everything, because Romans 13, you mentioned that, render the things, you know, that are Caesar's, but also render those things, you know, that are of God. So we have to know what the things are of God and the things are of Caesar, and we do render to Caesar, unless if Caesar violates the laws that God has placed in the scriptures. And then at that point, we have to take a stand, and it could cost us something. But we always render to God first. And I think there's a lot of confusion with that within the Christian church, and it shouldn't be, because it's pretty well defined in Scripture. There's a time to extend the olive branch and turn the other cheek, and then there's a time to stand up and protect over your loved ones.
Yeah, Daniel, look at Daniel. In the book of Daniel, he was told not to pray to anybody but
by the
king.
government authorities.
By the government authorities.
Yeah.
You, nobody, for this time, you can't pray. And what did Daniel do? He went back to his home. He opened up his window so everyone could see him. He bowed down on his knees, on his face, 3 times that day towards Jerusalem, as was his custom since he was young, knowing full well that he could end up in the lion's den. And he did. He ended up in the lion's den, and yet the Lord brought him through.
And we've got pastors today saying, they probably would say Daniel's wrong, but in theory, if you didn't put a name to it, they would say he's wrong.
Yeah.
They think we submit no matter what. But that's where God's given us a conscience of right and wrong, and you never submit to a government where it's immoral or wrong, you see. And that's one of the problems we have to get back to, really understanding the Word of God. One thing that I heard a pastor say years ago, that when something becomes legal in America, people think it's moral, and when it becomes illegal, they think it's immoral. And so abortion became legal, and that's why many Americans today think it's moral. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And if they outlaw church, people think, well, if you go to church, it's immoral. That's why, as Christians, we have to make sure we clearly define, we do not blur the lines between right and wrong.
Yeah, you know, in many ways, people's eyes just need to be open to these things. I'm going to be traveling up, actually, tomorrow to Sacramento, and I'm going to be there speaking on behalf of Christian churches, a group that seems really cool to me, the Freedom Angels. They've invited me out, so I know several of you, the Freedom Angels, are watching right now. A little shout out to you ladies. And, you know, Heidi from that group, she mentioned this verse that she's been praying over, and so Heidi, I just wanted to mention this verse right now. But you mentioned this, that Jesus stood still and called to them and said, "What do you want me to do?" And they said to him, "Lord, that our eyes may be opened." So Jesus had compassion and touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. They followed Jesus. Their eyes were opened. And that's Heidi's prayer right now. That's my prayer right now. I'm sure that your prayer warrior wife that you mentioned is a prayer warrior. I'm sure she's praying that our eyes would be opened right now. Yeah. There is a spiritual battle we're in. This is a really hard fight. So I'm going to stay in the fight. You know, I fought to have our drive-in style church services. We had to threaten a lawsuit and all that kind of stuff, but we ended up prevailing. We ended up having our drive-in services. Now I'm going to be opening up the church, and I'm going to do so because it's our constitutional right to do so, and we're going to continue to push for our constitutional rights, regardless of what other people think. Some people might be watching this right now going, "Well, you're stupid." Well, that's fine. You don't have to come to the church, you know. But the people that want to come together and they want to hear the Word of God and they want to do it inside the church and they don't want to sit in their car when it's 100 degrees here where we live, they're going to come in, and we're going to have a good time, and we're going to worship Jesus together, and that's how we're going to do it. At some point, we need to stand for our rights, and I'm going to do that up there in Sacramento with the Freedom Angels. We're going to go up there and we're going to tell Gavin Newsom that we're not good with the things that he's been doing, and probably not going to sway his opinion much. But I'll tell you what, he's going to know we're there.
Well, and in the meantime, you can always persuade other people's opinion. Your local city council, your county supervisors are very powerful on what they can let open up again here. So, you want to work those people too. You want to make friends out of them, but you also want to make sure they know you're here, because politicians, we do have to keep an eye on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Politicians work for us. If you are an American citizen, they work for us. We are the king. I cannot emphasize that enough. But understand this. The only thing it takes for evil to prevail is for good men and women like you to sit on your couch and do nothing. If you can join me up in Sacramento for this protest, this rally there at the state capitol, it's going to be on Friday, high noon. Love to have you up there. If you can't make it up there and join the Freedom Angels and join me, then try to help send somebody up there. Maybe somebody can't afford to get up there, and you can get them up there. You can pay their way. Then pay their way. Get somebody up there. But we've all got to do something. It's important for you to reach out to your senators, your assembly members, your local county supervisors. And I'll tell you this, as you do that, as you reach out to them, what you'll find is there's many that do agree with you, and there's many that are on your side, and there's some that aren't. But you know what? That's what happens when we, the people, vote and put the wrong people into office. We need to put the right people into office. We have an election coming up. Do you think that in some way COVID is going to be used to kind of skew this?
Oh, yeah,
where do you
Gavin
think that's
Newsom's
going?
talking about not close down the polls and vote by mail only, as well as almost the entire Democratic Party is across the United States. And we know through election integrity, just in Orange County, there was over 60,000 ballots that came in from people who didn't live in Orange County that last election. It is ripe for fraud. And of course, Gavin wants to do it, from my understanding, and the Dems all across America are trying to do that because they want to make sure their people get in. So it's ripe for fraud. And again, citizens, we got to get tougher as people of faith. And because look at, we're in the third great American crisis is what a friend of mine, Dr. Larry Arnn from Hillsdale College, believes. And it's whether we're going to survive and have our freedoms in the next few years. And so this is we have to raise our game. And this vote by mail could be devastating to us because it's real hard to track the, anybody can go in and pick up 20 ballots and write addresses down. So it's really hard to track millions of voters to see if they're fraudulent or not. So be wary and exercise your civic responsibility vigorously.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we're just about out of time now. I want to ask you, just as a closing, two questions. Let me ask you. The first one is this: what are your plans for the future? Do I see maybe a run for the House of Representatives?
Well, whatever God's will is, but I would love. I'm waiting to see, because they're redrawing districts this year, how the lines line up. So that'll determine if I go for a run or not for that. But I'm open for that. I've been asked to run for a county supervisor seat. But again, I truly have learned over the years, and learned the hard way, that I'm happiest when God puts me in a position. So I want to keep working. I want to keep fighting. I just pray for good health so I can be effective and strategic and intentional till the day I die. And so I hope something opens up for me. So you can pray for that.
We definitely would be praying for you for that. Be praying for your entire family. You've got a wonderful family.
Yes.
Just in closing, one final thing. If you could just give the audience one, we've talked about a lot of stuff that's, man, this is some crazy stuff. This is some weird stuff. Could you give them just some closing encouragement? One, like if you could encourage them with one thing, what would it be?
What would it be? Well, I actually thought about some of these things today. What do we need? What do I need, Mike Garst? And I thought it in terms of athletics. And so I was talking to my wife about that, and she said, what we need is perseverance. So she read a scripture to me, and And it's pretty good because perseverance produces a lot of wonderful things, just not just biblical things, but number one, it toughens you up.
Yeah.
Toughens you up for the fight or through tough situations you have to go through. You got to be tough and persevere to raise kids, right? You got to be tough and persevere to work hard and keep your job and just get through life. But the scriptures tells us that perseverance produces character in us, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint. So I think for Mike Morrell, I'm going to try to work on the word perseverance, toughen myself up a little bit. I certainly need to develop some character, and during these days, I certainly need hope, and hope again does not disappoint. So that's what I would leave our audience with.
All right. Perseverance and hope. I love it.
Yeah.
So thank you, Senator
Thank
Morrell,
you.
for coming on to the show tonight. Love having you out anytime we can. We've had you out to the church several times. You are a man of character. We're very happy to know
Thank
you
you.
here, and really hope that you do get a chance to run for Congress someday. We'll see how those things turn out. If you are tuning in right now, I want to invite you to come back with us next week. Many of you parents want to know, how does the human body work? How do the hormones work? We'll talk maybe even a little bit more about COVID next week, but we're going to have a doctor out. Dr. Patricia Bogema is going to be our guest on the program next week. She's going to talk to you guys about the hormones, the male hormones, female hormones. What are some of the medical institutions doing? What are some of the agendas? What is she seeing? You're not going to want to miss Dr. Patricia Bogema next week. Until then, continue to take back the public square.